What's up, Thought Stackers? John here, and today we're going to be discussing the design principle of consistency. I'm first going to talk about why I think it's so powerful, especially in terms of investing, your health, and thinking in general. Then we're going to talk about the 4 types of consistency in design, and then wrap it all up with one of my favorite quotes by Emerson. So if you're ready, I'm ready, he's ready. Let's get started. All right, so today's design principle is consistency. Let's hop right in. It's important because any good system needs to be easily understood by a wide variety of people really quickly. Now, before I get into the exact 4 distinct types of consistency in design, I want to kind of show you why I think it's so important. And the best illustration in the real world, in my opinion, is the power of compounding. Now, many of you have probably heard about this, especially if you do any kind of investing, but compound interest or power of compounding has some serious big benefits. And the key principle is consistently reinvesting the money that you earn, that you put into your investments. Now, for this graph, take a look at it. So if we start, say I give you $1,000 and you have an interest rate of 10%, each year you're getting some money. And if you continue to let that money stay in your account and you let it keep reinvesting over time, say 20 years, compounding takes a long time, but it's very powerful and you make a lot of money. So after 20 years, right here, this little example has you over $6,000 gain over that initial $1,000. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but this is why it's important to always keep adding more money that you save. Like, you're always trying to save a certain percentage of how much you make in your salary. But this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize the actual power and that snowball effect that you get from investing. And I was lucky enough when I graduated college that my cousin Kevin, he gave me this book by Ramit Sethi called "I Will Teach You to Be Rich." It's one of those really gimmicky titles, but it worked. Like, at that time, I had nobody telling me why it was important to invest or any of that into my future, and it's crazy. Like, the amount of money that people save right now, and they're getting into the 30s and 40s, and they might have a house and car and all these things, but they might only have $10,000 in their savings account or their retirement account. And that's not going to be sufficient when you get up into your later days. And the problem with compounding, as you can see here, it's important to start early. So you got to be lucky. It's like if you're in your 20s and you start investing for retirement, that end tail of this investment of compounding, the real jump is those last 5-10 years that, that all that money is accumulated and is doubling and doubling, doubling, and doing its growth rate. If you haven't started investing in your retirement at any age, like right now, this might be a wake-up call as like my offering to you. You should probably think about it. I'm not an investment advisor or any of that thing, but it's something that I think about on a regular basis, and probably you should too. If you haven't already, just open up an account. I use Vanguard. And invest regularly, whatever you can. Some people like Mr. Money Mustache, these extreme savers, they save 60 to 70% of their salary. And yeah, it might seem crazy, if you made $70,000 a year to save 60% of that. It's like, how can you live? And you have to really live minimal. But the amount that you're putting in, and based on this power law of compounding, you could technically retire in 15 years, which is crazy, especially if you keep a minimalist lifestyle. And it really just becomes being patient. But so that's why I'm saying consistency is a very powerful tool, just because of this snowball effect. And where consistency also is important is health. Here you have The Rock. He says, success isn't always about greatness, it's about consistency. There it is. Consistent hard work gains success. Greatness will come. And this reminds me of a friend that I have, and let's call him Bob, but he is a very smart guy. He's about my age, and he reads tons and tons about health stuff all the time. what's the latest fad, what's the latest diet, what's the latest workout routine, what's the most optimal thing to do. And unfortunately, he is not in the best shape. He might have the 99th percentile of health and knowledge out there, but what is lacking is his inconsistency of working out, his inconsistency of going into the gym and putting in the reps and doing all that work. And I would rather know a tenth of what he knows, but every day wake up and go lift something heavy, something consistent. Because at the end of the day, even based on that compounding, you're going to increase, in that amount of time. It might take a year, it might take 2 years, but I'd rather be 2 years consistent than, 1 year studying the most optimal stuff, never being consistent. The gap in which I'll be at to where I would be at if I didn't go into the gym would be staggering. And another one would be learning. And this is somebody who I really respect. His name is Charlie Munger. He's Warren Buffett's right-hand man. And he is an avid learner, lifelong learner. He's the one who kind of instilled in me what it meant to learn after college. I thought once you go to school, you're kind of done. You just go to work and you do your thing. But reading his books and reading like Porsche Almanac, great book if you haven't read it. He has a system, and it just is so simple, right? It's go to bed smarter than when you woke up. And over time, every day you learning a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more is like you adding a little bit of money to your retirement account, and you're adding, and it's all those past days of learning is also the webs of the new thoughts, as your brain is kind of piecing them together and structuring them. I look at that as the interest rate. Over time, you're going to have significant amount of, brain power and situational awareness so that when big things need your attention as you get older, those big key decisions, because there's only probably a couple key decisions in your life that dictate everything, whether it's buying a house or picking the right spouse, picking the right job, like when to quit a job, when to raise a family. Like, these are definitive life moments that if you have a narrow view of the world and a narrow understanding of how this world is, whatever system you're in, whether you're in the States or in another country, it's all matters. So I think going to bed smarter than when you woke up is probably one of the simplest things you can do to be consistent that has the biggest bang for your dollar in life. Now let's get into some of the design aspects of consistency. There are 4 kinds of consistency, and the first one is aesthetics. That is consistency of style and appearance. Let's get into 3 examples. I think this will make it the clearest understanding of what aesthetic means. First is CocaCola. Now, as you can see here, they are a brand that when you even seeing the silhouette of somebody's hand, they're so ingrained in our culture and in their marketing is so consistent for such a long duration of time, across generations, that that this is a Coke bottle. You know what Coke stands for, right? And they've always been preaching it. They want you to think that Coke is, like happiness, or it's associated with family and, refreshment, getting like a holiday. Like, you remember the polar bears or the Santa Claus? Like, they have such a wide reach in terms of every aspect of our culture that they do a good job with aesthetics. They're consistent. They have the same color. They have the same message essentially, and that's very powerful over the last decades. The next is McDonald's. If you go to a McDonald's in Japan or Hong Kong, Istanbul, wherever, Kuwait, you will know you're at a McDonald's. And that's how the brand works. If you want to be global, you want to know that if I go anywhere in the world and I walk in and I order chicken McNuggets or I order a McDouble, that I'm going to get the same thing or very similar, right? So you might not get exactly the same, because I know different cultures have a little bit different spin on some of the McDonald's offerings, but a lot of them are, at least there's a core base that, and they probably do it for Americans. It's like Americans who don't feel like getting outside the box and challenging their cuisine will want to know that there is a McChicken somewhere in the world for them. The last for aesthetics is Porsche or Porsche. I don't know. How do you guys pronounce it? I've always been on the fence. I even went to the museum in Germany once, and I still couldn't get a good answer out of them. So if you know how I should be pronouncing it, definitely tell me the way. Write it out phonetically in the comments below. But I thought this ad was perfect. There are a few lines here, but you know that across the board their design hasn't changed much since they started, and you can just tell. You know, if I covered this logo and just said what is this shape, what car company is that, you know, anybody who's aware of cars would be like, oh yeah, that's a Porsche for sure, definitely Porsche. That's it. Like, it's not going to change. That's consistency over time. You know, some will say it's a perfect design, you know, quote unquote perfect, and you know that resonates. You know, that's just goes across generations, and people will then say, what does Porsche mean, right? Like, you know, if I asked you, or I just asked, what does this side profile speak to you? A lot of people would say, you know, this is a sports car. It's elegant. It's, you know, it's classy. It's, you know, it's beauty. That's Porsche. So that's aesthetics. You know, it's being consistent over time. The next one is functional, and that means consistency of meaning and action. And this, let's go into two examples. The first one being traffic lights. I mean, you drive past them every day, and it's important to understand that if the function of the traffic light somehow was changed, let's imagine, you know, the red was swapped out with blue, or it didn't give you a yellow anymore, or it just went in some random pattern, how many accidents do you think would happen in a day? Probably quite a few, to be honest, because people would be unaware of what was actually happening, and then boom, crash. So function matters, consistency. It's like every stop light should be the same function. Otherwise, people have to think, and especially in a high probability of death scenario, if something bad goes wrong in that system, you know, it's a problem. Here's another example: music buttons. I can hide the title music buttons, and you would know what these arrows are referring to. I know that if I click this triangle, I'm going to hear some music. If I click these two rectangles, I'm going to pause something, or I'm going to fast forward or skip. You know, that's just functional consistency by definition. The next thing we're going to talk about is internal. So this is consistency with other elements in a system. Now, a system, let's go into a road ecosystem, right? So this can be, now before we talked about just the traffic light, now we're going to talk about everything in that system at all. So as soon as you get into your car and you drive on the road, you are now in the road ecosystem. So everything in that system needs to have some kind of consistency. And I like to look at it as kind of like the road signs. It's like everybody knows what a stop sign is and what to do when they see it. Or a yield sign, or a do not enter, because if you're going to enter there, you're probably going to get in an accident. You don't want to be this person. This would happen if, say, we changed the meaning of stop sign to really mean go, but we never changed it to say go or turn it green, and we just left it red, and boom, something bad happens. Or imagine you're driving along the road and you have a right turn only, and you turn right and you go into this ditch. How much are you going to trust signs anymore? And the big thing about internal consistency is building trust in that system. So everybody right now, going back to here, you've seen these signs, you followed what those signs said, they didn't do you wrong, you trust that system, and until that changes, you're going to follow and trust that ecosystem. So let's get on to the last one, which is external. And this one's a little bit different than the other three. So it's consistency with other elements in the environment. So this is more looking at, you know, how we said an internal system. What if we had a whole bunch of these internal systems? Is there some kind of commonality between all of them that people would understand? And a good example of this is alarms, right? So Up here you have an alarm that's, meant for, say, a missile that's going to come and potentially hit an island or something. So this alarm would go off, and you know that something bad's happening, and you should go take an appropriate action. Or if you hear an alarm here, it's a different use case. The alarm is meant to say, "Get out of my way. We have a sick person on board, and we need to clear out the roadway for this ambulance." You still know that, hey, something's wrong and I need to pay attention, I need to proceed with caution. And the last one would be like a burglar alarm, right? So if you're sleeping sound at night and somebody tries to break into your house and something starts beeping, you know to get into your fight mode or fight or flight mode and take the appropriate action. So that's external consistency. It's what to do across the board. All right, so the key takeaways for this design principle is that consistency will make your design easier to comprehend and use. So try and use it as much as possible where appropriate. The big three really are the first three. It's aesthetics, function, and internal, because that's really what you're controlling, that system that you're focused on. But where applicable, use good external consistency when needed so that your system relates to other systems. And there's a quote from Emerson that's kind of like the juxtaposition of all the benefits of consistency that I thought is important. So you have two sides of the equation. So Emerson says, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. With consistency, a great soul has simply nothing to do. He may as well concern himself with his shadow on the wall. Speak what you think now in hard words, and tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it may contradict everything you said today. Ah, so you shall be sure to be misunderstood. Is it too bad, then, to be misunderstood? Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood." Now, I take this as saying, the world is always changing, and it's simply conforming to society's expectations, can feel like you're not living. It's the whole shadow on the wall. It's you have to kind of think outside the box sometimes, challenge what has been the status quo, just to be able to innovate and to kind of make a mark and do something better in the current complex system that we call life. So always take it with a grain of salt that if you find something that is consistent can be better, you might be misunderstood with your recommendation, but if you really believe in it, definitely proceed to share it and be misunderstood, but persevere and make everybody understand. All right, that does it for today's design principle. I hope you enjoyed the new format. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, definitely hit that subscribe button and throw me a like because you're legit. And with that, remember, stay thoughtful.